So you just asked me about the kind of teaching that people do, which is what they do to earn a buck, because what they are is artists, and that's their real thing, and the teaching is just how they rake it in. And I have certainly witnessed plenty of that in my life, but from early on, the fact that I was so interested in trying to write about music meaningfully, and the fact that I was so pissed off at all these professors that obviously had never even engaged basic questions about that, uh, didn't cause me to turn, to the truth of the heart or something like that. It caused me to want to find ways to talk about music well, and that just fitted in with wanting to teach, because not only did I want to transmit, but I realized, I don't know, from an early age that talking to people about this was somehow fundamental in my own development. I often make the remark that I feel I have been particularly fortunate in always having among my few friends some people who had certain capacities that I really took seriously, and they had them more richly than I did. With some people, I gather that sort of is a source of envy, resentment, and whatnot. With me, it was always a source of oh, pleasure and just a sense that, this is something real that I'm into. Um, and so, teaching and thinking about music and bringing students from some uh, backward position to some forward position, that kind of thing always struck me as very interesting. So that the fact that I spent my life really in academe, either as a student or then as a teacher, um, that is something that is not what I was able to compose in spite of. It was something that was just integrally part of my activity musically, and certainly related to composing all the time. One thing that I always felt that was really great about my job at Princeton, where I was a professor for umpteen years, teaching in the music department, and Princeton was the kind of place where it was possible, that is, the Princeton Music Department was the kind of place where it was possible to, at all times, be teaching on my own frontier. Uh, that is, I never had some syllabus that I was teaching the contents of again. That just never came up. Um, and I suppose in that Milton Babbitt was my model. I mean, when he from when he went in to teach second year harmony or something, he was going at some music in ways that he, Milton Babbitt, thought were interesting and fruitful. He was not covering the material that you cover in second year harmony. And I tried to be the same. I remember when I was approaching retirement, I had sort of mentally retired one term earlier than I actually retired. And that term, for the first time in my life, I decided, oh, well, I'll just do such and such again. And I really sort of repeated. I mean, I got out the same reading list that, and we did the same. We went through the same stuff again. That is with different students, but I went through it again. Um, I had various experiences with Princeton professors that somehow conveyed to me, always with shock, that here were guys going back into the classroom tomorrow to give the lecture on X that they have given for 20 consecutive years. Well, it was never like this. And music shouldn't be like that, for heaven's sakes. Um, so, yeah, I was always able at Princeton uh, to go ahead, and push things in directions that interested me, and at the same time, to bring students along from where they were at. Um, this would, of course, at times mean that I was very consciously teaching something or other that I was trying to find out, that I was trying to learn. And sometimes that thing would be quite definite. Like sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes everybody was trying to figure, okay, how would you get hold of this? But sometimes it was a perfectly definite thing. Like a kid would come in where he's writing a piece that clearly is headed for the commercial market, and he would love to get this on a radio show and played. It's his commercial rock thing. And frequently with such a student, I'd sit or I'd listen to it. I had discussion, and on one or two occasions, I would say, I remember particularly one occasion where I said to the kid, now remember, this is Princeton undergraduates, so that the world and the bank account is not unknown to them. I said, hey, one thing I think I should make clear to you, if just in case you don't understand, what I'm telling you about the piece that you're working on is coming from a point of view and just an attitude towards things that is very different from what I'm aware of as sort of relevant attitudes to this stuff. And the student said, well, yeah, that's what I'm in here for. He says, that other stuff I'm getting in New York. So, I like that. What he has to know about all those things I don't want to know about, he's getting that in New York. And he likes to hear what I've got to say. With a concert pianist that was an undergraduate here named Bob Taub. He's recorded pieces of Milton's, also got a great recording of Scriabin's Sixth Sonata. I used to teach Bob, and we frequently enough had some piano music that we were getting at somewhere or other. And I would sit down at the keyboard, and like Otto Luning in my story, try to illustrate something that I wanted to get at. And I once asked him, "Hey, Bob, this gets a little ridiculous with you standing right here. I sit down at the keyboard and do something or other." I said, "Am I getting across to you?" And he said, "Well, hey, of course." He said, "Yes, I'm the pianist. That means I can tell what you're not doing from pianistic considerations." And he said, "Yes, the point of what you're doing is what I get." And that was very encouraging to me to realize that, oh yeah, teaching something that you know nothing about can be perfectly informative to students especially. What they're observing in that case is you finding out about things. That can be much more valuable to them than you're transmitting to them a bunch of things you've found out that they won't have to find out the hard way because you're transmitting it to them. So yes, along with teaching in my frontier, sort of my own frontier, I began to realize that, hey, something that's on their frontier not only has value to them, but has value to me. It puts me out there in something that otherwise I might not get into. Um, yeah, I realized, like, when I spent 4 months out in Colorado, I'd say in, I don't know, 70s or the 80s, somewhere in there, um, teaching at Colorado College, they had a system where for a month a student would take one thing with one teacher and meet every day. And that included class things, and I had some classes, and um, I remember right away being struck with the students at Colorado College in music, with the point that when they arrived at college, music that they were interested in, wanted to get into, music meant what the groups of their time were up to. That's what music was. And the first thing they discover as they enter the college is that the curriculum makes it clear that one thing music isn't is everything you're concerned with. We got all this other stuff that we're going to lay out on you. And I remember saying at one group, it was probably a group of 5 kids, I remember saying that, okay, now look, next week I want each of you, or next week, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I want each of you to bring in some piece, a record of some piece that you're particularly attached to. And I said, and I'll do the same. I'll bring some piece. And the students looked sort of stunned. And one of them, who was in fact an Air Force guy, so he was not a kid, he was saying, hey, Mr. Randall, do you realize that this will be the first time since I entered college that I ever listened to music for pleasure? And I believe him, because of course he had been assigned this, that, and the other to do something unspeakable with. Yeah, I found that very good. Just we would start kicking around all the music that came up. It was a big moment for me, having been for years working on and finding and improving, I thought, ways of talking about music, and especially I'm talking now about ways of presenting hard nitty-gritty about how pieces were working, and listen to stuff, get the score out there, and put things on the blackboard that would sort of show how it was going, all that kind of thing. One day, just by accident, I heard a graduate student in music theory practicing some 19th century German piece on the piano. And I suddenly realized, and this was a student in theory who could, I suppose, shink her eyes, and, who knows what, this person did not exhibit a clue as to what this music might be. It was just shocking. Starting right then, I started with students, sitting them down at the piano or bring in their instrument, if any, and start playing, and I will keep prodding you. By that point, it wasn't so much a question of discussing anything. That was the opposite of what I wanted, to get them into consideration of, no, I want you to just sense what this thing is. And it turns out that I could do that pretty well, and it was not unlike what Leonard Schuer did. Like, I heard about Leonard from a cousin of mine who was a Leonard addict, and was a competent pianist. she reported that in his later years, when you'd play those first three notes and he'd stop you, the thing he would say was, "That's not true." And I like that. That's not true. And I translate that to mean what we've been talking about. You're not, it's depressing some levers, making some diddle. And that was sort of what I was trying to get students. I wanted them to just totally invest themselves in making this music happen. The worst thing that happens with teaching your clever ideas about musical analysis and so forth is that students, almost to the last one, are assuming that what you're talking about is what they should listen for. That's very bad. That means that you're developing the grid, the cookie cutter, that they should make sure the sound comes at them through. They didn't get the idea that, hey, wait a minute, when I'm doing this, I am attempting to describe something I heard. I am not describing something to listen for. I'm describing something that happened. And there's a huge difference. But for a student or somebody else laying this stuff out, you figure, okay, let's see if I can follow it. And there's something fundamentally wrong there. And from there, I got very much into performance coaching. In my contribution to Walter's book, I relate one story, which is true. I mean, I think my most amazing success at instrumental coaching was a very intelligent, sensitive, talented girl, undergraduate, came in, playing Chopin or something, like you do know not what. And so I prodded at her, and I mean, it really sounded inept. I mean, this was low-grade inept, like people would have assumed, as I assumed, she can't play the piano. I mean, she shouldn't be working on that beat. She should, be done, or something like that. I started prodding her on that piece, and there was a class there, and I and the whole class and she were astounded when about 20 minutes later, she was sounding like an artiste. And I mean, that's from prodding, from getting people into, hey, you got to feel what you're doing here. And then you can make a fast remark about what it is you're doing. And I guess one has to be kind of good at that to make something happen. But I got very much attached to performance coaching, as I said to you the other day, not because I'm a natural born performer, which I no doubt am. That wasn't it. It was because that was the way, I wasn't teaching theory the right way. And that's the way to teach somebody theory. That's how I got into that. It seems to me I also want to connect that with, it felt very much part and parcel of how I was going in relation to composition. Because coming off of that childhood situation that I described for you, I began to see the extent to which, in fact, composing is a question of putting together this thing that will establish you as something special and will earn plaudits from audiences, and that's what it's all about. You're trying to write this piece that they out there will take in, and then with the kicker that to me, as to most other composers, you have no high regard for the discrimination of the people out there that are going to do this. It's just that that's what you're doing it for. so it began to strike me more and more, wait a minute, if I want to feel that I am communicating something of value to people that I value, not just astounding the jerks, well, then the whole setup where I do it and you take it in is not the obvious choice. More obvious is to try to get a communication going. And it was on that basis that I started going to the cellar. Did I already get into this at all? Well, usually with one other person. And unscripted stuff, we would just, the understanding with which we would do this was, I've always described as ethical and social. Namely, you gotta listen, you gotta keep listening, you regard everything that happens just the way you regard anything that you put out. That's where it is, that's what we've got. And sort of understood to be foreboding was start showing off the licks that you can play on your instrument or anything like that. Frequently enough use instruments you don't play so that that won't happen. And so I got very interested in music being genuinely two-way communicative, not just something that somebody does and distinguishes himself doing for others. And yeah, during those days, I think I should say that one of the people, certainly the most important in my life, is my friend and colleague Ben Boritz, because we were always involved together in that and in all of the teaching things that sort of went with that and emerged from that and were consistent with that. And we would get into these things both here at Princeton when he was on the faculty here. We did some plenty of team teaching, you might call it, or group sessions, as well as small sessions. And then I would go up to Bard and we'd do things up there. And Ben and I have kept very much in touch. I should mention him sort of along with Leonard Shure as somebody exchanges with whom have been just vital and for a long stretch of our lives. Yes, I'm thinking of direct influences that I can identify on my own composing from stuff that I listen to. I think, like so many people, not only in America but in Europe, Webern landed on me like a ton of bricks at a certain point. I would say he was already dead. This would have been maybe in the early 50s when his stuff was becoming readily available in the United States, maybe the late 40s. And now that hit me particularly strongly in ways that I was very conscious of because, and you know, this is the way this works, because somehow I was on the verge of something that I hadn't yet been able to go over the edge on. And now I guess I would say that what it was twofold. Number one, it's not, this is late Webern we're talking about, it's not full, it's not hairy with musical action and so forth. You know, the individual note counts for plenty, and you listen to individual notes or individual chords, but there's no great magic show going on like in Richard Strauss, and there's no no heavy sweat at all, as there always is in Schoenberg, where just to follow it is, an achievement. The idea that it was in that surface sense simple and really giving you things that you knew what you were hearing, and that was it. Now the second thing about that was that what you were hearing was an almost literal reflection of the process by which it was constructed. There again, the contrast to Schoenberg was extreme, because as was notorious in Europe, Schoenberg had these new ideas of serialization, which he was putting into all the old German forms, ensembles, and whatnot. And I mean, when I listen to Schoenberg's fourth string quartet, I'm just struck by, this is awful, because he's wearing himself out trying to recreate his image of something bygone, and it's not reflected in the notes that go by, and it deeply offends me. Whereas Webern, by me, suddenly was right on the target of means of construction, which are not some big secret that you'll find out about in college. They're right there under your nose, and what you're listening to is very simple and straightforward. That whole image of things was really was very striking to me. Something worth noticing there, that what was talked about in Europe, and I guess then it leaked through to over here, was Webern the serialist and the possibility of serializing in all dimensions. Now you notice in talking about how Webern landed on me, I haven't said anything like that. And that's it. I mean, and the way it landed on me was the way I described. And the fact that it was 12 tone, I mean, he laid even his 12 out there in a sense where you really, yeah, I mean, you get like the piano variations. Oh, you can hear the 12 go this way and then go ass backwards. But anyway, it was the idea of the construction being right up where you could smell it and not being some grossly complicated thing. And so, yeah, that was a case where I was really influenced by something that I heard. But what I would say is that my constant preoccupation with constructivist, pitch-based stuff means that when anything gets through to me, it gets through in a peculiar sense. And, it's going to come out somehow through that kind of receptor, so that it seems to me probably it's the case that my music has not tended to show very, very carefully what I was influenced by. For example, I think the most familiar comparison to me that I've heard from people is that my music of, like, I don't know, the last 30 years sounds like Morton Feldman. I never really paid any attention to Morton Feldman until very recently when I was writing a review of John Cage. And indeed, I think that the music that Morton Feldman wrote in his last 10 years or so is really outstanding and astounding, and in some of the ways I'm describing, although then there's other besides. But the fact is that the music maybe that I sound most like, in fact, is not music I even knew when I was doing it. The Webern thing I can really recognize. But, you know, back in the days, maybe when I was being more formed, I remember composers that, particularly in my 20s, that I was studying the scores of. There's some, does anybody even do that anymore in electronic age? I don't know. Studying scores of Stravinsky, Hindemith, Bartok, Copland, and Schoenberg a little less. I mean, too messy. Yeah, but I really got into those. In what way did those influence me? I'm not sure. But they certainly went in there heavily. The music that I listen to now is heavily my favorite old classics. Like I listen to Beethoven and Bach and Bruckner. Bruckner. Recently, for the first time, I've come up with the music of Franz Schmidt. That's Schmidt with a D, not Florent Schmidt with a double T. Franz Schmidt, I've come up with his 4 symphonies, and numbers 2 and number 4, especially number 4, strikes me as just an incredible piece, but I can't see that it would ever in any way influence what I'm doing. And I think it's that fact that I'm rooted in this mania of pitch construction that means I can't come on like some of these other guys, so I don't. It's not a trivial matter that I never spoke of what I was doing as improvisation. And one of the reasons is that carries sort of a lot of wrong implications to it, and especially like the implication that you're going to let it all hang out. That wasn't my interest. Also, there are so many well-known schools or styles of improvisation, and to be of a school or of a style already strikes me as counter to what I was trying to do in the basement. I was more trying to just get the feel of this is a conversation in sound, and we are not concerned with this being meritorious music. The thought there being that those standards for what's acceptable music are already well formed in ours and every other person's heads. And the point of going to the cellar was to explore what could come out untrammeled by any of that. So that there is no, we hope, there is no preliminary sense of what would be good improvisation or even rewarding. I think it seemed rewarding when you really felt you were into it as you were doing it, and when you felt that the role of the other person was somehow not destructive, and it felt like the other person was in it too. because you're not supposed to reflect your music lessons. That for another tradition of improvisation, my friend Walter Bronte, early in life, was the string bass player in a terrific ensemble called Nuovo Consonanza. And what they did was improvise, and what I heard was like 5 minute, 7 minute pieces, in the going mode of European composition at the time, sort of post-Stockhausen thing. And one of the basic requirements, they were all great instrumentalists, and one of the basic requirements was you never played normal sounds. You were committed to what became known as extended resources. You're trying to keep finding new things. Now, the thing about that is, like, I don't like to call what I ever did by the same heading as that, because what they were doing, and they did it splendidly, I mean, what they were doing was pursuing a particular image, a particular sonic image of music, and trying to achieve that spontaneously without planning, but just from knowing each other and knowing what the image is. And yeah, that was never my interest, except listening to them do it. It was fantastic. Hey, in a way, I like some of the stuff Ben did better than what I was doing. Ben really had that knack of getting himself into what he was into without giving a damn what it might sound like. Like some of his greatest stretches, as far as I'm concerned, involved him just on that Krumar keyboard instrument, and let that sit as long as it wants to sit. And now pretty soon, I characterize that very well, as most things I characterize in birds. I said that in Ben's old improvisation things, what he was doing there, now how did I put it? Something, I haven't got it right. I remember the last word. What I was basically saying was that these things have nothing obvious going for them except depth. And that's the way they sound. They're always that, oh, this is, oh, and I don't mean that. I mean some kind of psychological, and then another one. And that's a little more, that's sort of an illustration of what we're after. Yeah, Ben doing it on the Krumar was fine. And hey, also the thing about 2 and 3 people, that is the best. I mean, when you've got 6 people begins to just not resemble what I'm talking about, because it gets to be performing. Oh, some guys in Colorado that I worked with a lot, Wally Shoup and Ross, God, it would come to me. They were young guys. There were an older guy and a young guy who constituted themselves an improvised music duo. And they would even stage concerts. Now, that's another thing where I was coming from. Concert was out. You were not doing this as an exhibition for anybody. This was between you. Interesting point that we always tape them and listen to them avidly afterwards. That raises another question, which is interesting. Ross and Wally would always refer to the field of improvised music. And they would speak of what they did as improvised music. And that wasn't my target. I had a great time doing things with them, but just the fact that you could regard your output with certain sort of predefined virtuous characteristics as the point of what you were doing, that already removed it a notch from what I felt my interest was. During the time that I was into that, I did not do composing. I needed some reason to get back into composing, and I think first of all, I got tired. I just plain got tired of the session scene. Nothing more profound than that. But then composition began to feel to me very different and very much influenced by that whole experience, because I feel was able to think about composition as me thinking something through, or living something through, or whatever, like that. Not as me producing a product of certain characteristics. And now this got especially easy with modern technology. I love it that having started as a little lad composing by writing pencil marks on paper, finding, if you were lucky, within the not too distant future, somebody who on an instrument could play those for you. By the time you had what you'd call a piece, I in fact did get, or my father did get, a copyist to copy this so that you could then produce a decent reproduction to hand to some instrumentalists who might play it. Now I sit down there back to the cellar, and I'm just like a sculptor. I'm working directly on sound with MIDI. I love MIDI. And I'm never, well, that's not entirely true. I can do some of my pitch constructing and whatnot. But once I'm actually into a piece, I'm working directly on sound. And I guess it has that nice solipsistic feel to it that for some reason two-person sessions would have to me. And I think it goes, my satisfaction with it goes back to something that I think I've always believed and said, which is, okay, I'm simply concentrating, it's always been this way. I'm concentrating on, in writing this piece, on what I want this to be and how I want this to sound. I'm not concerned that this is or isn't of some fashion or some style. I'm not concerned with that. And my justification for that was not that I don't give a shit about anybody else. That's not the point. The point is, I have no reason to think I'm unique. I figure if this seems to me such a serious outgrowth of the way I am, all considered and judged and so forth, there'll be other people who will pick it up that way. And that's fine. And that's what I do with other people who do things. So yeah, composition feels like that. There are people for whom composition is fulfilling commissions for musical functions and occasions out there. And it just isn't that for me. I have the feeling that I ought to, just because with respect to the field of musical composition, computer music, whatever, my writing looks peculiar. Like, why did I, why did I do all this? And I remember that in working to describe music well, and as I think I've said plenty, I was a real fanatic for analyzing music, but at the same time for feeling that, gee, wait a minute, I haven't yet found a way that's really getting at what this is going on. So that caused me not only to write a little funny, but to write sometimes with the conscious idea that, wait a minute, how about writing like music instead of writing about music? Well, there's obvious mileage in that notion, which others than me have also pursued with great results. And I've pursued that from time to time. I think, yes, early in Compose Yourself, like the baseball story and or the Revelstoke story. Well, in fact, the whole thing. I mean, it is clearly a question there of using words and meanings, by the way. Now, that was one thing that frequently did strike me, that when we talk about musicalizing words, that means to some people getting their dictionary meanings out of the way. Deal with them for their sonic value. Well, to me, their dictionary meanings are precisely part of their sonic value. Like when you say amore, that's the dictionary meaning of that is part of the sound of it. Yeah, when I was thinking of writing musically, that did not mean to me getting rid of, least of all did it mean to me getting rid of grammar. A lot of people figure that, hey, the way to do that is, sort of make words that are lists. And not that I don't like to do that from time to time, but to me, the sound of grammar is one hell of a sound, and that I don't want to get rid of. On the contrary, I like to sort of pursue it and elaborate upon it. So I got into writing like music, and I forget whether at first, but in the course of doing a lot of writing, I have also, of course, written like music about music. And, I still keep looking for things I might do. And well, I think you can see how this somehow connects very well with my uncertainties about teaching and communicating, and even with my attitude about composing.